Hello again. We have now, we're now going to start the formal part of our program, and you can continue to eat and deliver dishes over to the open window over there by the door until Amanda starts her keynote.
Just leave the dishes. Just
in
leave
about
the dishes.
half an hour. This part of the program is going to be asking folks to stand up and be recognized for the various work that they're doing for NFP. So the very first thing we'd like to do is ask those of you who are first-timers at this event to please stand up so we can recognize you. And I'm one.
Wow.
Yay! Clap, 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 clap. The next group I'm going to ask to be recognized are current and past elected officials of NFP. Please rise.
No, elected officials.
Then, Nebraskans for Peace State Board members. Please rise.
Same thing.
The Omaha Leadership Group members, please rise. The Palestinian Rights Task Force members, please rise. And last but certainly not least, the Citizens Climate Lobby members, please rise. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Mark Walsh, the NFP's Omaha coordinator. I hope everybody knows him. He's going to come up and say a few words.
Thank you, Karen. So this is the part you all really came for, I'm sure. This is the part where I ask you to donate money. So there are some very colorful boxes in the center of your tables. So please use them to deposit your checks or your pledges for your future donations for the coming year. You should have all gotten a long, skinny piece of paper as you came in. If you didn't, grab one on the way out, because it tells you how to make donations after you go home, either online or by mailing them in.
Mark, do you take cash?
Of course we take cash. Yes, in God we trust, all others cash, is that how it goes? So yes, and we desperately need more funds. As you read the news, you know that there are problems in the world like we've never seen before, not just in this country, but around the world. And Nebraskans for Peace works on a lot of those issues. So we need your help to pay our staff, to keep the wheels turning. We're almost 50 years old, and that's thanks to a lot of you in this room who've donated, so thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause. So that's about it. Just please be generous, and thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thanks, Mark. So now I'm going to introduce our state and subcommittee reports, and the individuals who I announce are going to come up and talk about what they've done and what's planned for the future. So first we're going to have Sandy Hanna come up to talk about the Palestinian Rights Task Force. Sandy?
Thank you. Very glad to see so many people here tonight, because we really need more people in our group. We have a wonderful group of task force.
Closer.
A task force, is that big enough?
Here, rotate it.
I think it's
Did you?
not on. That better?
Oh, much better.
Okay. I'll start over that we need as many people as we can in our task force, because if you've been watching the news lately, you know, this week Palestinians are defending themselves in a non-violent protest, with a non-violent protest, and being killed for it. And that's very sad to see in that country. When we sit back here and watch it on the news and feel like we can't do anything, we can do things. Our country is connected with this. Our task force began about 10 years ago. We had somebody speak to the Nebraskans for Peace on the subject of water needed in the Palestinian territory. That term itself is interesting. I give blood regularly, and when I go to give blood, and I had been to Palestine and Israel, when I came back, they asked me, we can't give blood for 2 years or so after you've traveled somewhere, and they wanted to know where I traveled, and I said Israel and Palestine, and they said, oh, Israel, fine. Palestine? Where's that? This is the Red Cross. So it really concerns me. So our group started about 10 years ago, and our main goal is an educational one, to let people know about Palestine, know where Palestine is and what Mount Palestine means to the world. And so we're asking everybody to come, if you'd like to one of our leadership meetings. We meet at UNO in the CEC building on the fourth Monday of the month. Although, everybody listen here, this month, the fourth Monday is Memorial Day, so we're going to do it on the third Monday in the same room, 128 in that building. And we often have a agenda, of course, but we often have somebody talk to us about something about it, so that we as a task force continue to learn. And we've just now divided into some groups, so that we're going to have 3 committees, one working with the subject of BDS. How many people know what those initials are for? It stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, which is a way to make a country turn around. And the country we would like to turn around is the State of Israel in its reference to Palestine. The other committees are a congressional committee where we go and speak to our representatives. And the third is a religious leadership group. So we have those 3 committees to work with. So I urge you to come join us. And we are happy to see new faces. Thank you.
So anybody interested in the Palestinian Rights Task Force, search out Sandy and she will sign you up. Next, I'd like to ask Steve Horn to please come up and talk about the weekly Saturday Peace Vigil. Steve?
Well, today marked a doubling of our committee, of our people that came to the corner. So it went to 6. To keep this up on the 17th time, we'll have roughly 500,000 people. So let's keep going. I hope you're aware of all the things that are happening in the world. I've had people ask me things like, how's it going in the Middle East? John Bolton is going to get us in a war if we don't do something about this pretty serious. Of course, Trump. And you got the Israeli Prime Minister. These people are heading us for war along with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is heavily involved in Yemen, and we are involved there heavily too. They just announced this last week or 2, we have special forces in Yemen, in addition to everything else we're doing there. Yemen is a terrible tragedy, and we should do something about it. I'm going to just digress here. Back in the back, I put a box of DVDs, and anybody who wants one can have it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've been getting these over the last year or 2 from Free Speech TV and from other places, and each of them have something on them that's worth seeing. Take them if you want them. Give them to somebody else. Pass them on. These people need to know what's going on, and you get read from places like DVDs like that, and from Democracy Now! If you've ever heard of it. Yeah, she's got them right back there. I guess that's pretty well all I got to say. Come on out. We're there 1 to 2 every Saturday, except when something terrible happens, like a snowstorm that's dangerous to be on the corner. That's a dangerous corner to be on when it's slick out or anything like that. Everybody's welcome. We'd like to have more. We had Jerry came out today. That was one of the new people, and his friend. And we hope to get more. We need to have more because this stuff that's going on in the national scene is just incredible. We need to get the women's to come out again, Women's March. So we'd like to have that many. Okay, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Search out Steve if you're interested in joining in on the Peace Vigil. Now, Mark Welsh is going to come up and he's going to talk about two things, the White Clay update and also the Citizen Climate Lobby, and I'll hand over the mic.
Thank you. You've probably all heard about White Clay. It was shut down, the 4 liquor stores there, shut down, finally, thanks to Nebraskans for Peace, thanks to Frank Lemire, thanks to many of you in this room. So thank you all for your help in making that happen. White Clay, as far as the street people are concerned, it's a ghost town now. They're moved on. They've gone to Gordon. Some of them have. Some of them have sobered up, which is the good news. But unfortunately, there are still problems there, even though the city of White Clay is getting some new businesses, which is good news. There are future new businesses planned for the reservation as well. So there's good news up there. The bad news is the bootlegging continues. I've just heard from Gordon, Nebraska, and other cities. They're still buying lots of alcohol and taking it onto a dry reservation, which I just learned is not just a state crime, but it's also a federal crime. So hopefully our government will start to step up and do the right thing there. The next thing that I'm to talk about is Citizens Climate Lobby. That's an organization where if you get our newsletter, you'll see some articles in there about Citizens Climate Lobby. We have one plan. We started Nebraskans for Peace about 7 years ago, I think, or 6 years ago, started 3 chapters, one in each of our legislative districts of Citizens Climate Lobby, which is another organization that has one goal. And that one goal is to get our government, Congress, to pass one law that will tax fossil fuels at the source. So at the mine, at the well, at the place where it's imported into this country, you tax it there. You start out with a small tax, but then you raise that tax every year, sending a signal to industry in this country, you need to figure some other thing to use other than fossil fuels. Wind, solar, we don't care what it is, you figure it out. Congress can't figure that out. We wasted $1 billion with Solyndra a few years ago under the previous administration. So we don't want our government to have anything to do with that. We just want them to tell industry, this is going to get too expensive. Figure out a solution. We want all of that money to come back to the citizens in equal portions per person so that we are protected from the higher prices that will happen when we have this escalating tax on fossil fuels. So all of us will get a carbon dividend check every month or a direct deposit into your savings account or checking account. The IRS already knows where your money lives, so it'll just, instead of taking it, they'll give it to you back, much like a tax dividend at the end of the year. Last 2 things. On June 5th, if you're on our mailing list, you will get a request to call Congress, because 1 week later, I and 6 other people from Nebraska, over 1,100 people from around the country will be in Washington, D.C., lobbying our members of Congress. On Tuesday, the 12th, we will fan out, after getting our picture taken on the Capitol steps, we will fan out and go to every legislative district. 435 offices, or is it 535? I can't remember. I'll be going to probably 4 or 5 of them here in Nebraska. So we really need your help to call the week before to let them know that you support legislation like I just described. So watch your emails, watch your newspaper, your Nebraska Report, etc. for that information. Thank you very much.
And now for a super fun part of the agenda, we've got our Lifetime Peacemaker Awards. We've got Victoria Peterson and Ruth Kruse, who are both going to be recognized. Joe Peterson. Joe Peterson. Did I just ruin it?
Well, Victoria was a wonderful woman, but she's no longer with us.
Oh, it's
Oh, you've got the old agenda.
I've got the old agenda. Sorry. There was a typo. Joe Peterson, can you please come up?
Sure.
That's entirely my fault. I made this agenda. Victoria Peterson, bless her heart. I mixed her name up with Virginia Walsh more times than I can count, and mostly when I was with Victoria, I think. And she was so gracious. She said, well, if you're going to confuse me with somebody, that's a good person to be confused with. And Virginia said the same thing to me. So thank you. I'm very sorry.
Well, I always thought Victoria was my mother. So, and I said, oh, yeah, that's true. That's good. Not so. But there's a new award. Oh, there's a new award, and it has to do with recognizing lifetime advocacy, lifetime activism. And so Virginia Walsh was, did I get that right? Was well chosen for this award, especially for the first one. And you'll find out as I go on to talk about that why. Of course, you know, when Virginia and I spoke the first time about this, she said, oh, not me. There's so many other people that deserve this more than me. Think of Ann Else. Think of, and she started listing names. Carol Schmidt, think of, and she started going through the names of so many of you here, because she knows that her actions, although that's a lifetime, she exemplifies a lifetime achievement in activism, but she also recognizes that she didn't work alone, and that she also respects and honors everyone's efforts who've also been working a lifetime for peace and justice. What I especially like is that Virginia Walsh is a woman, and we often hear stories of his story and not her story. So what I want to do is give you a little bit about her story. Just a tiny little bit. I only get 5 minutes. I could go on for 3 hours. But her bedrock issues have been racism, women's issues, and peace. And it's been her life work. But she's always been ahead of her time. So I'm going to give you a few examples of that. Imagine this. Virginia was born 8 years after women won the right to vote. 8 years. And after World War II, Virginia began college at Duchesne because Creighton would accept women. 2 years later, in 1947, Virginia started going to college at Creighton. She transferred to Creighton when they would accept women, and she joined a club called the DePorres Club. Well, the DePorres Club, for those who are not Catholic, is Martin DePorres, right? Did I say that right? Is the patron saint of interracial harmony and justice. This is 1947. Think about that. Terms like civil rights were unknown, especially in Omaha, which was sometimes called Birmingham of the North. And before Rosa Parks, before Dr. King, there was the DePorres Club. The priest who started the group was intent on making the church accept that racism was a sin, because at that time they didn't. The DePorres Club challenged discrimination and worked for fair practices, and Virginia was honored by that club at Creighton for her work at the DePorres Club. They did things like call people and try to get employers to hire African American workers. The club itself did things like strategies asking folks to pay bus fares in pennies in order to interrupt the regular flow. This is before Montgomery, right? Before put pennies in the change register so it'd slow it down, 18 pennies, and then they have to count it and crank it every single penny, and that would slow it down so that eventually they would have to integrate the busing system. And so that club honored Virginia. Virginia completed her studies, her university studies at what was called University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Is that right, Lincoln?
Master's level.
Okay, she became a college professor, taught English literature, and developed women's literature programs so that we could hear women, now think about the time of this in the 50s, so that we could hear stories about women by women. And I appreciate that very much. She married her beloved Tom.
Together they had 7 children. And she decided she liked to use birth control. But her priest said it was a sin. So because she's a woman of integrity, she quit the church.
How graduated.
Well, I have to think about that a minute. But she's worked for women's rights her whole life. And for example, think about the virulent time in those in the abortion clinics where they would blow them up and people were very angry and ugly. It was Virginia who regularly would walk women with women into the clinic so that they could have safe passage. She was awarded by Planned Parenthood with the Margaret Sanger Award for her tireless efforts. And not only that, she created a phone banking system where she identified voters who would vote for pro-choice policies. So now think back, this is 1980s, 1987-ish, and we think our head's spinning when we hear about from Obama to Trump. Think about what was happening from Carter to Reagan. And it was making Virginia's head spin a little bit, so she ran for the Senate. And just like now where you see women get up and they start to run for office because they know they have to speak out, they have to act. That was Virginia in the 1980s. At that time, we were blessed with her and Nebraskans for Peace because in 1983, she joined with Nebraskans for Peace. She was working on the nuclear freeze movement, anti-nuclear issues, and against the war. So she began calling folks and trying to gather folks that were also interested in the same issues, who were connected somehow to NFP, and around the state, and the people that she knew in Omaha. And she called that group together, and that first group started the Omaha Chapter of Nebraskans for Peace. That was also the first rice and beans dinner in the 1980s was started by Virginia Walsh. So she was also instrumental in establishing the state structure of Nebraskans for Peace. And she said one of her dearest memories of Nebraskans for Peace was going to Russia in the 80s, where folks got to see firsthand the ravages of war and starvation of the people there. And that's how I came to know Virginia, was through the peace movement. And eventually, she was the chair of the board when I was hired for my brief stint at the end of the 90s. She worked tirelessly on the board. She took on various capacities. No job was too small. No job was beneath her. And she worked wherever there was energy, and then she always brought her own, which was aplenty. She performed all those daily grinds. You know, women, for men they build monuments. For women, we get waffles. They're thrown away, they do it again and again, right? Again and again. But every day, she'd get up and do whatever she needed to. Write letters, attend a protest, sing outside of the prisons while people were murdered inside. And she's always written those letters and letters to the editor, and her bedrock issues remain racism, women's issues, and peace. Her strategy of choice is the vote. She has and continues to work for the Democratic Party. She hoped that NFP would be sort of the guidepost for the Democratic Party in Nebraska. And it's just notable that this year in August, as Virginia turns 90, she continues her life of advocacy and activism, canvassing door to door as part of an interracial team in District 11. She continues to knock on doors, to turn out votes, and to break down walls. She's a woman ahead of her time. And so I want to thank Virginia for her example, her life, for working for peace and justice. So happy birthday, Virginia. And thank you.
Thank you to all of the members of Nebraskans. All of the members of Nebraskans for Peace. for this honor. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's always a pleasure to be with you. I have, as Joe said, I first joined the board of Nebraskans for Peace the year after the 1982 election that I lost to people that were not Democrats. and if you, so I think that's about 40 years. Do you think it's about 40 years? I'm not really great on figuring it out. But I want to say a couple things about memory. I have 3 memories that I especially want to take just a minute to sing out about over the course of that time. That Joe made a reference to the first rice and beans dinner, and I remember that. It was at Augustana Lutheran Church. We were in the common room there, and we were sitting at long tables, and what the rice and beans symbolized was our solidarity with the Nicaraguan Sandinistas. And there are people in this room who have been working on that issue for a long time. So it's really lovely. I can remember it was the first time that I had ever seen salsa. It was so long ago that I didn't know salsa. But then I found out about it then. I don't know if you know anything about Nicaragua, but that was a time of revolution in Nicaragua, and the revolutionaries were called Sandinistas. What the role of the United States and some other capitalist enterprises was to provide the effort to provide funding for mercenaries to fight the revolution, because it was communist, it was socialist, and so Reagan was prevented actually from supporting by direct contributions to the Contras by the World War Powers Act is my memory of it. There might be somebody here who could correct me. But anyhow, so we were eating rice and beans in solidarity with the poor people of Nicaragua, and we are still eating rice and beans. But solidarity with the poor of the world, because that's who we are in Nebraskans for Peace. And wouldn't you rather be here than anywhere? Okay, so that's one memory. The second was, I remember 3 occasions when men were being executed at the Nebraska Penitentiary in the 1990s. And those men were Willie Otay first, and then John Joubert, and then Robert Williams, forgive me, Marilyn. And when we came to the 3rd execution, it wasn't all on the same day, of course. It was over a period of a few years, not very many years. But the state government changed the time of day of the execution to midnight, because they really didn't want to have people vigiling outside the penitentiary. It was bad for the morale or something. I don't understand that. But when the execution of Robert Williams was scheduled for midnight, we gathered nonetheless under the intrepid leadership of Marilyn Keeligan outside that awful building that has, I don't know, just bespeaks pain. And there was a group of drunken college students, male, from a fraternity that were out on a Friday night. It was Friday night. And they were chanting as the hours went down to midnight. They were chanting, "It's Friday, it's Friday." And it was macabre. And as soon as they would pause, we would sing. And we sang, "We are a gentle, loving people. We are singing for our lives. We are the gentle, loving people, and we are singing for our lives. So, after the execution is over, you know you were there. You at least say no. And memory number 3 was the weekly protest that NFP held the year before the U.S. invaded Iraq. We had this member, mentioned earlier, honored member of Victoria Peterson, who watched the U.S. government in that run-up. It was very visible, and she saw it. She was, I think, 75. She was 75, and she was basically kind of a private person. But she saw ahead of time with a kind of clairvoyance that the U.S. military was getting ready to come into Iraq, and her hair was on fire. She said, we have to say no to that war. So get out there on 72nd and Dodge, a holy corner, as Steve has mentioned already. Every week we will say no to this run-up to war. And so that's, we all stood there. Well, when she said that, it was about May. And that was all right, except that, you know, at the end of the summer, then comes fall, then comes winter. And we got frostbitten fingers, and we had a lot of negative feedback from passers-by, things thrown at us from cars, because if you look like you might be a critic of your government, you're going to be perceived as being a radical traitor, and so you get kind of a mixed reaction. But you also get a lot of smiles and thumbs up, and at least you were there to say no. It makes you very happy. It was worth doing. 15 years later, Victoria, the U.S. is still fighting a war in Afghanistan, a spin-off of that invasion of Iraq. As you can tell, I love being in NFP. Thanks for this honor tonight. Thanks for the memories.
To recognize Ruth Kruse.
And now that I stand before you, would you all look carefully at me, and then when Ruth comes up, look carefully at Ruth. Because people keep confusing us. And that's fine with me. I think that's a great honor to be mistaken for Ruth Kruse. I think we both have white hair. So yes, it is a great honor to honor and that to be up here to recognize another Nebraskan for peace, another strong woman, Ruth Wallace Kruse, who was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1930, which was a surprise. And Ruth says if you cannot detect the Bostonian accent, that's because she moved when she was 8 months old. Her dad worked for the Department of Agriculture, and they moved a lot. The first move at age 8 months was to Estancia, New Mexico. That was a big surprise for Ruth's mother. She had never lived in a small town. It had always been Boston. And after 4.5 years, they moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, and then after another 4.5 years to Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Ruth received her bachelor's in music, philosophy, and religion at Nebraska Wesleyan, where she met Lowen. Then at Garrett United Methodist Seminary, she received a Master's of Christian Education, where she met Lowen for the second time. The first time, he had been the boyfriend of her best friend. So from Shelton, Nebraska through Custer City, Norfolk, Lincoln, Omaha, Ruth moved, training religious education teachers, teaching music, serving as the chair of a state women's commission, a member of Another Mother for Peace, director of the United Methodist Ministries of Northeast Omaha, coordinator of Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, following her son's terrible automobile accident. I had lunch with Ruth last week, and one of the first things that Ruth said to me as she sat down was that she had just been reminiscing about the first time she met Virginia Walsh. Ruth said she had discovered her powerlessness in peace and justice issues, so she joined the women's movement, and there she met Virginia. Both had joined for the same reason, though neither knew it of the other person. And as Ruth is telling me this story, she didn't know that Virginia was also being honored today. Another thing that I was very impressed with was the amount of work that Ruth has done in North Omaha. She was the director of the United Methodist Ministries of Northeast Omaha. This was a this was a volunteer position. They had paid staff, but Ruth was the volunteer. The group is made up of 3 Methodist churches, and they were involved with a lot of job training, housing rehabilitation, single mother support. That was a high priority for Ruth. And they took children camping to let them get a taste of an environment other than the city. Another thing that struck me was Ruth's determination that in raising their 2 children, a boy and a girl, there would be no division of labor based on gender. Ruth's daughter learned to handle every tool in her dad's shop, and her son learned how to cook and clean and do laundry and so on. In fact, Ruth, did you say that your daughter built her own house? She did.
And it's energy efficient house.
Energy efficient. You all heard that. She built an energy efficient house. Okay. Ruth just told me that her daughter was going to refuse her degree because they wouldn't put the right name on it. And Ruth talked her out of that, right? I guess there's a child like that in every family. Keeps the family interesting. So for years we have seen Ruth and Lowen at every gathering of peacemakers in this area. Every march, every protest, every group making phone calls, knocking on doors, registering voters. They were just tireless in their pursuit of peace and justice. And we know that Ruth's beloved spouse died 6 months ago, the day after Thanksgiving. And we sorrow with Ruth at this loss and offer to her our love and condolences. We also know that this magnificent woman, Ruth has always been in her own right, carries on. Has anybody tried to get a hold of her lately? She hasn't slowed down one moment, it seems to me. In fact, I asked her what she thinks we need to be aware of as we look to the future. Her concern, looking ahead, is the problem of Earth's burgeoning population at the same time that the world's wealth continues to be concentrated more and more in the hands of fewer and fewer, coupled with the alarming and too readily ignored reality of global climate change. So Ruth is looking ahead, sees what needs to be done, and we can all move with her, with this strong, determined woman. So I present to you Ruth Kruse. Ruth, come up here with me so we can see what we both do.
Peace is not something that we can do alone. We have to join hands. And there are so many aspects of it. Lowen and I had a wonderful teacher at Nebraska Wesleyan. He was a mentor as well. He had been in World War I. He was from the middle of Nebraska, spoke German some. When he was in France in the World War, he was able to use his German, and he commandeered a group of some 20 German persons and came up with a creative way to make friends of them. And this was such an impressive thing to all of those students of his that watched him come up with creative ways to make friends of enemies. We have been so blessed in the 5 places that we have lived in Nebraska. 4 of the 5 all had communities of peacemakers. And that was just such a blessing to us, from rural peacemakers to this present day. I so appreciate it. And just want to share with you a little thing that my daughter sent me for Mother's Day. Just got it this afternoon. I'm going to say that the you in this is the plural you. Dare to believe the whispers in your ears that you might be meaningful, that one day you really might change the world.